So it's another journalist behaving badly episode tonight. Actually, it's early morning. I'm doing this on the overnight shift. And this is at the Washington Post. It's by Hal Raines. This came out December 20th. It's an opinion piece. And you want to talk about ultra left, SJW, white guilt. Here you go. Now, the way he starts out this article, because he's just discovered information about the Civil War that nobody told you about, and he's got to share it with you. But he starts this out by, and I'm not making this up here, folks, plugging his own book in third person. He's like 80 years old. I think at that point you need to retire. Hal Raines, a former executive editor of the New York Times. Now, back in 2003, he took over as executive editor of the New York Times because there was this major scandal at the New York Times. Just thought you might like to know that. So keep that in mind as we're reading this. But he's the author of Silent Cavalry, How Union Soldiers from Alabama Helped Sherman Burn Atlanta and Then Got Written Out of History, as though he's praising Sherman burning Atlanta. Now, the first thing he talks about, and I'm not going to read this for the sake of time, I'm just going to skip through this. It's a lengthy article. Can I get the words out? Okay, let's get started here, folks. Okay. So he starts out by saying that his great-grandfather was threatened with hanging for being a damned old Lincolnite by his neighbors in the Alabama mountains. Really? So what he's trying to do here from the get-go is showcase the Confederacy as being evil. That's what he's trying to do here. But he talks about this skipped history of white Southerners who fought for the Union Army. That's the big news. These white Southerners who fought for the Union Army. Well, Mr. Raines, I was born and raised in the South. I knew this growing up. People in the North knew this growing up, that you had people in the South who fought for the Union Army. I mean, people had different views all over the place. Somehow this is news to this guy. And now he starts dripping with the liberal or SJW white guilt, saying that his name is anglicized, as though that's a bad thing. Then he talks about this traumatic experience he had as a kid, 10 years old in class, because they had to be shown the Confederate battle flag with bullet holes in it. I'm not making this up, folks. I'm not making this up. So let's just get to the meat of this. Oh, and pardon my camera if it's shaking a little bit. I'm using a makeshift tripod here. How did a regiment of 2,066 fighters and spies from the Mountain South, chosen by General William Tecumseh Sherman and his personal escort on the march to the sea, get erased? Oddly, the explanation reaches back to Columbia University, whose pro-Confederate Dunning School of Reconstruction history at the start of the 20th century uses a lot of run-on sentences here. Spread a false narrative of lost cause heroism and suffering among aristocratic plantation owners. Well, Mr. Raines, my family came over here from Germany and Ireland. My relatives didn't have two nickels to rub together. And I have family going back to the 1700s in Kentucky. On my dad's side, on my mom's side, it goes back to the 1700s in Kentucky. On my dad's side, they came through Ellis Island. They had to be screened through Ellis Island. But as a 10-year-old, I stood in the presence of Marie Bankhead Owen, who showed me and all my white elementary school classmates the bullet holes in Confederate battle flags carried by, quote-unquote, our boys. She and her husband, Thomas McAlroy Owen, reigned from 1901 to 1955 as directors of the archives in a monolithic, as though these two people saying that they reigned over this building here, this monolithic alabaster building, like they're king and queen, across from the Alabama state capitol. They made the decision not to collect the service records of an estimated 3,000 white Alabamians who enlisted in the Union Army after it occupied Huntsville, Alabama in 1862. Well, Mr. Raines, if you're from, let's say, Boston or San Francisco or New York or Chicago, aren't you going to focus on the people who fought for your side first? Then you're going to go and look into these other soldiers who may have fought on whatever the side was. I mean, that's just the natural instinct of things. But he's trying to make it sound as though this was an evil plot to just erase any mention of these soldiers in the South who fought for the Union. The Owens were not alone in what was a national academic movement to play down the sins of enslavers. In the files of Montgomery, I found the century-old correspondence, here we go, folks, between Thomas Owen and Columbia University historian William Archibald Dunning about their mission to give a pro-Southern slant to the American Historical Association. Now, he goes on to talk about how, I think it was in 1905, somewhere around there, they invited Dunning and Owen, they invited W.E.B. Du Bois to speak, and there was this big to-do or argument, disagreement over Reconstruction, the benefits of Reconstruction. Then he talks about the tenets of the Confederacy, the lost cause myth here. The war was about states' rights, not slavery. African Americans were scientifically proven to be a servile race. Reconstruction was a failure because they were incapable of governing. Well, Mr. Raines, in 1862, this is within a year of the Civil War now, Leland Stanford, and I've mentioned this many times before, Leland Stanford, who was the then elected governor of California, during his State of the State address in Sacramento, called the Chinese an inferior race. And at the same time, they were also portraying the Irish as drunken monkeys on posters. What do you have to say about that, Mr. Raines? And it doesn't clarify here about Reconstruction who was incapable of governing. He just says that Reconstruction was a failure because they were incapable of governing. But wait till we talk about, or rather how he frames the argument here in a moment with Dunning. Now, Dunning, by the way, he died in 1922. The fact that few Americans have ever heard of the 1st Alabama Cavalry I've heard of them, and the defiant anti-secession activist who led its founding, Charles Christopher Sheets, who we'll get to here in just a moment, documents how such historiographic trickery produced what the Mellon Foundation called, quote, a woefully incomplete story of the American past. The Foundation's Monuments program is spending $500 million to erect accurate memorials to political dissidents, women, and minorities who are underrepresented in many best-selling history books. So are the violent busing riots in Boston in 1974 and 1975, Mr. Raines, is that an accurate memorial? Boston was also a major slave auction hub. Let me take a sip of my coffee here. Is it an accurate memorial when in 1862 you had Leland Stanford calling the Chinese, the Asians in California, an inferior race, saying that they tainted the shores of California culture? Is it an accurate memorial when the Union, the United States government, was misplacing all these Native Americans and relocating them in the West or wherever? But you see, these are the accurate memorials, but the South somehow is evil. The South is evil. Now, this Charles Christopher Sheets, he headed up this thing called the Free State of Winston. It says here, as a student, I heard tidbits about Sheets because he was born in 1839 in my mother's ancestral county, the Free State of Winston, and the county was one of 22 in central and northern Alabama that elected anti-secession delegates to the enslaver-dominated convention that took Alabama out of the Union on January 11th, 1861. But he leaves something out here. Now, the way he does this is you go through this article and you can click on the links, and you click on this link for Free State of Winston. Well, as it turns out, Charles Christopher Sheets, who headed up this Free State of Winston County, even though they were anti-secessionists, they didn't want to secede from the Union, from the North, he headed up this movement to have his county of Winston secede from the state of Alabama. But conveniently, Mr. Haynes is leaving that, or Raines rather, is leaving, I'm going to call him Haynes for some reason, But Raines, Mr. Raines, is leaving this out of the article. And so he goes on and on here. But this is where he backtracks. I love this. This is where he backtracks. The backstory of how Confederate history was written to glorify the defeated side is complicated and requires a dip into. And now, how many of you have heard that argument come up? That the history of the Confederacy is complicated, or people say, "Oh, well, you're just using that cliche to, hide behind your pro-Confederate stance." It requires a dip into academic historiography and plantation economics. It's also full of odd twists. Dunning was the son of a wealthy, here you go, folks, New Jersey industrialist who taught him that Southern plantation masters were unfairly punished during Reconstruction. So Mr. Dunning, who you claim was in cahoots with Mr. Owen to come up with this nefarious plot about the Confederacy and the glories of the Confederacy, was actually the son of a wealthy New Jersey industrialist. Well, thank you, Mr. Raines. Then he talks about Nathan Bedford Forrest, about King Cotton. Like I said, it's a very lengthy article. So let me get to the last two paragraphs, because this is really what he's trying to get at here. You go down to it, it's probably an article that runs about, I'd say about 3-4 pages. Seems like it. But removing some of the lugubrious monuments beloved by conservative Southerners, as though all Southerners are conservative, I'm a Southerner, I'm an independent voter, will allow an appreciation of the internal diversity of a war that claimed about 620,000 American lives. Internal diversity. We had internal diversity in the Civil War, really? And there's more to be learned, especially now that the Black Lives Matter movement inspired Alabama Department of Archives and History's modernizing director, Stephen Murray, to correct the mistakes of the Owen legacy. Even he doesn't know what surprises lurk as catalogers work through the vast files left by the Owens' team of lost cause manipulators. Mr. Raines, it is not uncommon for documents to be passed down or hidden in a closet somewhere or put in a library somewhere. They change hands. I love writing music in my spare time, study music history, and that happens all the time with music history. You're what they call a provincial composer, didn't travel far from home. He taught, wrote music in this particular area. And then all his scores got left somewhere or were stuffed in the back of, like I said, a closet, maybe a cabinet. Then discovered, decades or even centuries later. But this last paragraph really gets me. So last year, in aiding my research at the archives, my grandson Jasper Raines found the muslin-wrapped rosters of the first 3 Alabama companies sworn into the Union Army in 1862. For more than 100 years, these documents lay misfiled in the records of the Adjutant General's Office of the Alabama's Confederate government. He's got a lot of run-on sentences here. Murray speculated that the young Thomas McAdory Owen may have gotten them from the library. Is McAdory or McAdory? It's McAdory. But Thomas McAdory Owen might have gotten them from the Library of Congress director who befriended Owen when he was a post office clerk in D.C. in the 1890s. Aha! So you don't know for sure. You don't know for sure if Mr. Owen intentionally tried to hide these documents about these 3,000 Alabama soldiers. But you believe he did. The question remains, of course, as to whether they were purposely hidden under a false label by Owen himself, Owen and Dunning. But based on what I've learned since 1961, when I first ran across Sheets' name in Alabama folklore, I have to guess yes. And when it comes to the history of Alabama's mountain unionist, disappearance is the name of the game. But you failed to mention that Charles Christopher Sheets, who headed up this free state of Winston, even though he was an anti-secessionist, wanted to secede from the state of Alabama. Thank you, Mr. Raines. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, you know what to do. You can also follow me at Instagram, #JasonComposes, because I write music in my spare time. Or you can follow me at X, Culture Confederacy, at Culture Confed1 on X. So once again, a story at the Washington Post, another journalist behaving badly episode, not being honest here, talking about information from the Civil War you need to know about because he just discovered it. Even though I've known it for years. I've known it for years. So this is the Culture Confederacy saying peace out. Stay safe, everybody. God bless this thing called the United States. I'll catch you next time. And I'm definitely going to post something tonight for Christmas Eve. So I'll catch you then. Take care, everybody.